Welcome back, everyone. Today we're taking a deep dive into a book that's been generating a lot of buzz.
Sacrilege by Barbara Avon. It's a story that really gets under your skin.
We've got all our notes here, ready to explore a world of fallen priests.
Mysterious boarding houses.
And a love story that, well, let's just say it doesn't end in happily ever after.
Definitely not your typical romance.
More like a slow burn that ends in flames.
Exactly. And for those of you who love to analyze how authors craft their stories,
You know, those learner types out there.
this deep dive is for you. We'll be unpacking themes of guilt and faith,
Love and loss.
and seeing how Avon uses symbolism, foreshadowing, and character development to weave this really compelling narrative.
Okay, so let's start with our main character, Cristoforo.
Chris Corelli,
Right, Chris. He's a former priest.
struggling with, well, a lot. He's lost his faith.
Feels incredibly guilty about something from his past.
And he ends up at this boarding house.
Hoping to just disappear.
But of course, the past has a way of catching up with you,
Always does. Avon really sets the tone in that opening scene, you know.
where Chris throws his priest collar into a ditch.
Yes. It's such a powerful image. You can practically feel the weight of everything he's rejecting.
It's like he's shedding his old life,
Hmm.
trying to bury it.
But we know it's not that easy, right? We see him struggling with his inner demons through his diary entries.
Those diary entries are brilliant.
They give us a window into his mind.
His thoughts, his fears, his desires.
Things he can't admit to anyone else.
Exactly. It's like we're right there with him, experiencing his internal turmoil.
And then we have Jules.
The woman who runs the boarding house.
She's tough, guarded.
There's this sadness about her, though, like she's carrying a lot of pain
She's dealing with the loss of a baby.
recently. And she's in this relationship with a man who's controlling.
Abusive, even.
It's heartbreaking to see how she tries to cope.
Telling stories, especially to little Ella.
The young girl who lives in the boarding house.
That's an interesting detail, the storytelling. Why do you think Jules does that?
I think it's a way for her to escape, even if it's just for a little while. To create beauty in a world that feels pretty bleak.
It makes you wonder if maybe she's trying to give Ella the happy ending she's been denied.
Maybe. It's definitely a form of connection for her.
Speaking of Ella, she's in a tough spot. Her father is very controlling, keeps her isolated.
Doesn't let her go to school. Doesn't even want her talking to Jules.
And this is where Chris steps in.
He sees what's happening, and it triggers something in him.
His protective instincts.
Maybe a bit of his priestly past, too. That desire to help those in need.
They form this really strong bond, Chris and Ella.
It's one of the few bright spots in this otherwise pretty dark story.
Sadly, it doesn't last.
No. Both Ella and her father meet a tragic end. It's a harsh reminder that this world Avon has created.
It's not a safe place.
Not for anyone.
And let's talk about the boarding house itself. The setting.
It's practically a character.
Decrepit. Oppressive.
Full of secrets. It really reflects the inner turmoil of the people who live there.
We learn from an older resident, Mike,
He's been there forever, knows all the gossip,
that the house has a history, a connection to Jules' past.
adding another layer of complexity to the story.
And speaking of complexity, let's delve into those big themes.
Guilt,
Loss.
the possibility of redemption,
Chris is weighed down by his past. Jules is struggling to cope with her grief.
and then you have their connection.
Complicated,
Messy.
but also deeply human.
They're drawn to each other's brokenness, trying to find healing.
Or maybe just escape.
It's hard to say, but their individual struggles start to escalate.
Chris turns to alcohol, pills, anything to numb the pain.
And Jules, her mental state is deteriorating.
It's like they're both spiraling downwards.
And Avon starts introducing these subtle, supernatural
You
elements.
start to question what's real.
What's imagined?
Especially for Chris. He starts having these visions,
Oh,
adding this unsettling layer to the story.
like the house itself is haunted. Or maybe it's their past that are haunting them.
Then boom, we get this major twist.
The revelation of the boarding house's true nature,
It was church.
a church. And it's directly connected to Chris's past.
The sin he's been running from.
It's like they're trapped,
Not just physically in the house,
but spiritually too.
in this place of darkness.
And there's no escaping it.
We've covered a lot of ground already.
And we're just getting started.
In part 2, we'll delve even deeper. We'll explore the symbolism
The imagery.
and how Avon uses those elements to create this incredibly haunting atmosphere.
Stay tuned. Welcome back. You know, one of the things that makes Sacrilege so fascinating is how Avon uses these everyday objects.
Like what?
like roses,
Hmm.
to symbolize these deeper meanings. It's like she's giving you this secret decoder ring
Okay.
to unlock this hidden world within the story.
Yeah, it's not just about what
The
happens.
plot.
It's these little things that keep popping up that make you think, hmm.
Exactly.
Like the roses.
They're beautiful, right?
Yeah, and they're usually associated with love.
Passion.
Hmm.
But they also have thorns.
Right.
So they remind us that love can be painful.
And it can hurt you. It's like the roses themselves represent Chris and Jules.
Their relationship.
Yeah.
So complicated, so beautiful.
Yeah.
And ultimately,
Doomed.
yeah, and remember that scene where Chris is picking roses for Jules
And he gets pricked.
by a thorn? It's like Avon is foreshadowing
What's going to happen?
the pain their love will cause.
Oh, that's a good point. And then there's that other recurring image, the shadows.
The light.
They're everywhere.
It's intentional. The shadows represent all the stuff that's hidden,
the
the
secret.
things they don't want to face.
And the light,
That's like truth.
clarity, maybe even a glimmer of hope.
Maybe. But even the light in this story feels kind of,
Tainted.
yes,
Yeah.
like it can't quite penetrate all the darkness.
Okay, and we can't forget about Chris's diary entries.
So important.
They give us this look inside his head.
His struggle with faith, his
But-
guilt,
Yeah, it's almost like he's having this conversation with himself.
trying to make sense of it all.
And there are all these hints, little clues about what's to come.
Foreshadowing. Avon is a master of it.
You're right. For example, remember that one entry where Chris talks about temptation?
The danger of losing yourself to desire.
It's almost like he knows he's going to fall.
He can't resist Jules. And it's going to cost him,
Everything.
possibly.
Yeah.
Avon uses foreshadowing throughout the novel.
Like little breadcrumbs, leading us to the tragic ending.
Exactly. Sometimes it's subtle, sometimes it's more overt, but it's always there.
Like that scene with the crows.
Oh, yes. Chris remembers his aunt saying crows are a bad omen.
Harbingers of death.
And then what happens?
They appear again right before.
The climax, circling overhead. It's brilliant.
So what about the critics? What do they think of Sacrilege?
Oh, it's been quite divisive.
Really?
Some critics absolutely love it. They praise Avon for tackling these tough themes.
Head on.
They see it as a really powerful story.
But
But others find it too dark, too disturbing.
the ending is pretty bleak.
Yeah. And some people find the characters unsympathetic, hard to relate to.
Especially Chris.
He makes some questionable choices.
To say the least. There's also been some debate about how Avon portrays mental illness.
Substance abuse.
Some critics feel it's not handled sensitively enough.
Others say it's a realistic depiction of these struggles.
So it's a book that definitely gets people talking.
And that's what makes it so interesting.
And either love it or you hate it.
Or maybe you're somewhere in between. But you can't deny that it makes an impact.
Okay, before we wrap up this part, I wanted to circle back to the boarding house.
The setting.
Yeah, it's more than just a place where the story happens,
It's almost like a character itself.
reflecting the characters' inner lives.
We've talked about how rundown it is and how that mirrors their emotional state,
But it's also a boarding house.
which means people are always coming and going,
It's a place of transition.
like a way station,
And isn't that what Chris and Jules are both doing?
trying to escape their pasts,
Yeah.
trying to find somewhere to belong.
Even if it's just temporary.
Exactly. And the boarding house, with all its secrets and its strange residents,
It becomes this kind of pressure cooker.
forcing them to confront the things they're running from.
So we've covered symbolism, critical reception, and now the significance of the setting. What are your takeaways?
For me, one of the biggest takeaways is the power of symbolism. How Avon uses it to create this multi-layered story. It's a reminder that even the smallest details can be meaningful.
And what about that theme of the past, always catching up with you?
No matter how hard you try to run, it's a powerful message.
Chris and Jules try to escape their demons, but ultimately,
You have to face them.
and then there's that question of redemption. Can you find it even in the darkest of places?
Avon doesn't give us easy answers, but she makes us think about what it means to be redeemed.
We'll be back with the final part of this deep dive into Sacrilege. But for now, we want to hear from you. Welcome back to our deep dive into Sacrilege. We've talked about the characters, the symbolism, and the critical reception. We've even touched upon some pretty big questions about guilt, loss, and redemption. And I kind of want to shift gears a bit. Talk about the book from a writer's perspective. What makes this book so captivating on a purely technical level?
Well, one thing that really stands out is Avon's mastery of pacing. She knows how to build suspense, keep you on the edge of your seat, wondering what's going to happen next.
Yeah, it's like she's playing with our expectations, leading us down one path, and then, bam, a sudden twist.
Exactly. She keeps you guessing. And she does a brilliant job with foreshadowing, dropping these little hints early on that might seem insignificant at first.
But then they come back to haunt you later.
Literally.
Yeah.
Think about that first meeting between Chris and Jules. You can sense right away that their connection is going to be intense.
And dangerous.
Absolutely. And the way Elon uses the diary entries is really clever.
They give us a glimpse into Chris's mind, but they also offer these clues about his past.
It's like she's giving us pieces of a puzzle. And as we read, we start to put those pieces together.
Uncovering the truth about Chris and what he's running from.
Right. And Avon's language is just so vivid, so evocative. She creates these incredibly detailed pictures in your mind.
I remember that description of the boarding house. It was so creepy.
It's more than just a setting. It's a reflection of the characters' inner lives, their darkness, their decay.
It's practically a character itself, right?
Definitely. And the way Avon writes about Chris's struggle with faith, with his guilt, it's raw, it's honest. It makes him a very real, very flawed character.
And Jules, she's so complex, tough on the outside, but so vulnerable underneath.
It's interesting how Avon uses Jules' love of storytelling as a way for her to cope.
To escape the pain of her reality.
Exactly. And that connection she forms with Ella, it's brief, but it reveals a different side of Jules.
A softer side.
Yes. You know, Avon doesn't shy away from difficult themes. She explores the dark side of human nature.
Addiction.
The destructive power of secrets.
The complexities of faith.
It's not always easy to read, but it's powerful stuff.
Definitely a book that stays with you.
Makes you think.
Challenges your assumptions.
And maybe even forces you to confront some of your own demons.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive into Sacrilege, what are your takeaways? What resonated with you? Was it the symbolism, the characters, the exploration of these really difficult themes? Whatever it is, we encourage you to keep exploring. Check out Barbara Avon's other works and keep those pages turning. Thanks for joining us. Until next time.